It started as the perfect summer. Our little lakeside community, tucked behind neatly trimmed hedges and pastel-painted houses, had always been quiet. The lake in the center of the neighborhood was the pride of our HOA. Crystal waters reflecting the sky, G's gliding gracefully, and families fishing from the docks on weekends. For years, it had been my personal sanctuary. Fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was a ritual, a way to escape the endless chain-linked disputes and petty neighborhood squabbles that had defined life here. I had lived in this community for nearly a decade. I knew most of the residents by name, waved to them during my early morning walks, and even helped organize the annual summer picnic. But recently, tensions had been simmering. HOA meetings had grown heated, and it wasn't unusual to see a few disgruntled homeowners muttering about ruleless or lake usage. Still, I had never imagined anyone could take such extreme measures over something as trivial as fishing. It began subtly at first. One morning, I noticed the water seemed slightly off, its usual clarity replaced with a faint, murky haze. The fish weren't biting, and a strange chemical smell lingered near the shore. At first, I assumed it was seasonal algae or runoff from nearby landscaping projects. But then the warnings started to appear in the HOA bulletin. Residents are asked to avoid the lake temporarily. Water quality testing is underway. Curiosity mingled with suspicion, and my mind, like any wary neighborhood observers, immediately wondered, could someone have done this on purpose? By the second week, the fish were gone. The ducks had moved elsewhere, and even the community gardener commented that the aquatic plants were wilting. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no accident. Someone had tampered with the lake, and every instinct screamed it was personal. Whoever had done it clearly didn't consider the wider consequences, just the inconvenience it would cause me. Little did I know, the ripple effect of this act would extend far beyond my fishing dock, touching every faucet, every shower, every drop of water in the entire neighborhood. And the person responsible, our so-called guardian of rules, the HOA president herself, had no idea just how catastrophic her actions would become. The stage was set, the tension simmering, and the first domino had fallen. By the third week, it became undeniable. Someone had poisoned the lake. At first, the HOA tried to downplay it, calling it isolated incident or temporary imbalance in aquatic life. But the truth was written in the lifeless ripples, in the fish floating like small gray clouds along the surface. My neighbors whispered among themselves during morning walks, casting nervous glances at the docks that had once been bustling with activity. It wasn't just my hobby disrupted anymore. The entire neighborhood felt the tension. Late one evening, I walked along the shoreline with a flashlight, shining it across the water. There was a slick sheen across the surface, faintly iridescent, and a strange, metallic odor hung in the air. My stomach turned as I realized this wasn't natural. Whoever had done this had some knowledge of chemicals, of substances that could wipe out an ecosystem without leaving obvious evidence. The thought of a personal vendetta being carried out in such a quiet, suburban lake made my blood run cold. Rumors began circulating about potential suspects. Of course, the HOA president's name came up more than once. She had always been vocal about regulating lake access and had a history of confrontations with me during meetings. Her recent complaints about my frequent fishing trips suddenly took on a darker significance. Was it possible that someone had literally poisoned the lake to stop me? It sounded absurd, yet the evidence seemed to point directly toward her. Meanwhile, the community felt the first tremors of real danger. Water fountains sputtered odd tastes, hoses left residue on plants, and a few residents complained of rashes. The warnings escalated from avoid fishing to limit contact with lake water. Panic quietly simmered beneath the polite, manicured surface of our streets. No one realized how deeply the lake was connected to the water supply. The full extent of the damage was still invisible, and I couldn't yet imagine the storm that was about to hit. One thing was certain. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about the safety of everyone in the neighborhood. It wasn't until a routine water test arrived at my doorstep that the true scope of the disaster became clear. I had assumed the lake poisoning was an isolated nuisance, a cruel prank, or perhaps an HOA overreach. But the lab results painted a far darker picture. Traces of the same chemical found in the lake were present throughout the community's water system. Every tap, every showerhead, every sprinkler that touched our lawns was now contaminated. Panic didn't just linger at the edges of polite conversation, it surged through the neighborhood like a rising tide. I began mapping the water flow in my mind, tracing the pipes from the lake to individual homes. The lake wasn't just ornamental, It was a crucial reservoir feeding the community's entire water supply. My private haven, the place I had escaped to each morning for peace, had become the epicenter of a public health nightmare. My anger flared alongside my fear. The thought that someone could knowingly jeopardize the lives of everyone in the community, all to settle a personal vendetta against me, was incomprehensible. The HOA president, the very person who had publicly condemned my fishing habits, seemed oblivious to the magnitude of her actions. Emails and notices circulated, each more contradictory than the last, insisting the water was safe, while reports of strange tastes, odors, and rashes continued to pile up. Neighbors began hoarding bottled water, filling bathtubs in case municipal warnings escalated. The idyllic, orderly streets now echoed with the anxious murmurings of people who had spent years believing in the safety of their community. I felt trapped in the epicenter of a disaster I hadn't created but had been thrust into. The lake, once a source of joy, had become a weapon of chaos. Every ripple on its surface seemed to mock me, a reminder of both my personal violation and the collective threat to everyone I knew. The next step was inevitable, uncovering the culprit, and the closer I got, the more dangerous it became. The true story of our lake, and the HOA president's reckless obsession, was only beginning to unfold. The realization that the lake had poisoned our entire water system left me with no choice but to dig deeper. I began combing through HOA records, maintenance logs, and chemical purchase receipts, piecing together the puzzle. Every clue led to the same unsettling conclusion. Someone with access to the lake and knowledge of its ecosystem had deliberately tampered with it. The more I investigated, the clearer it became that this was no accident. This was personal, targeted, and disturbingly calculated. Neighbors started to notice my obsessive presence around the lake. Some offered anxious whispers about what they suspected. Others avoided me, uncomfortable with the growing drama. The air in the community was thick with paranoia. I pored over meeting minutes from the past year and recalled every confrontation I'd had with the HOA president. Her consistent criticism of my fishing, her complaints about unregulated activity on community property, and her increasingly aggressive insistence on enforcing petty rules now painted a chilling portrait of intent. I even checked security camera footage from the community park near the lake. There she was, wandering along the shore late at night, carrying small, unmarked containers. The footage didn't capture everything, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. She had clearly been handling something chemical, something designed to disrupt the lake's ecosystem. I couldn't believe it. Someone I had greeted with polite nods at every HOA meeting had crossed the line into outright sabotage. With evidence mounting, the situation escalated from a community inconvenience to a public hazard. Neighbors were now voicing urgent concerns about water safety, some demanding that the city intervene. I realized that exposing the HOA president wouldn't just vindicate me. It could protect everyone from further harm. But confrontation carried risk. If she sensed that I was on to her, the entire conflict could spiral into something even more dangerous. The lake, once peaceful, had become the battlefield, and the next move could determine the fate of our entire community. The moment of confrontation arrived quietly, yet it felt monumental. Armed with documents, lab reports, and video footage, I presented my findings at the next HOA meeting. The room, usually stiff with polite nods and small talk, was charged with tension. Homeowners leaned forward in their chairs, their faces a mixture of disbelief, anger, and fear. The weight of the revelation, our lake, our water, and our health compromised by one person's obsession, hung heavy in the air. The HOA president, usually sharp-tongued and controlling, faltered. Her confident posture wavered as the evidence was laid bare. Every purchase of toxic chemicals, every late night visit to the lake, every complaint she had made about my fishing trips now painted a damning picture. For the first time, the community saw her not as an enforcer of rules, but as a dangerous instigator whose personal vendetta had endangered dozens of lives. Water samples, once dismissed as minor contamination, now confirmed the severity of the situation. Faucets and showers carried the remnants of the chemical, sprinklers left streaks across lawns, and even the small ponds in neighbors' backyards showed signs of harm. Panic gave way to outrage. Parents, retirees, and long-time residents demanded immediate remediation. Emergency city services were called in, and specialists began draining and treating the lake, filtering out the poison that had so quietly, so meticulously spread throughout the community. The community's reaction was visceral. The HOA president was removed from her position immediately, and a formal investigation was launched. Trust, however, was broken. Friendly smiles and wave-filled mornings were replaced by cautious glances and whispered conversations. I realized that this incident, born from petty grievances and obsession, had fundamentally altered the neighborhood dynamic. Yet amidst the chaos, there was a small, lingering sense of vindication. The lake, though damaged, was being restored. The water, though tainted, would be made safe again. And I, whose quiet hobby had sparked such a destructive chain of events, had uncovered the truth before the consequences became irreversible. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began a slow, tense recovery. The lake, once a scene of quiet reflection, was drained, treated, and restocked. Specialized teams worked around the clock to remove the chemical contaminants, and municipal engineers oversaw the testing of every pipeline. The community's water, once a source of anxiety and fear, gradually returned to safety. There was a cautious optimism in the air, though an undercurrent of distrust lingered like a shadow over the manicured lawns and quiet streets. The HOA president faced legal consequences and a permanent ban from holding any position of authority in the neighborhood. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about the severity of her actions, her obsession with petty control having escalated into something dangerously reckless. Even those who had once defended her now admitted that the pursuit of arbitrary rules had nearly destroyed their home safety and the community's trust. Her fall from authority became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power without accountability could become weaponized. For my part, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. I reclaimed my spot on the dock, watching the water ripple gently under the sun. Fishing lines once again dipped into the clear water, but the experience had changed me. The lake was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a reminder of how fragile trust could be and how easily obsession could ripple outward to affect everyone. Each cast of the line now carried a quiet gratitude and a lingering wariness, a memory of chaos contained. Though the community had survived, its bonds were tested in ways that would be remembered for years. The lake had been poisoned, the water tainted, and lives disrupted. But truth and vigilance had prevailed. The message was clear: one person's petty vendetta could spark disaster, but a community united by awareness and action could reclaim its peace. And as the sun set across the restored lake, a tentative calm settled over the neighborhood once more.